everyone, and welcome to Tata Literature Live Business Shastras. This is a series in which we invite business leaders and management gurus to share their insights, vision, and expertise through conversations and discussions. Our previous 4 sessions have each drawn an engaged audience of over 6,000 people. So thank you for joining us in such numbers. Today, in the 5th Tata Literature Live Business Shastras, we present someone very much in the news, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, founder and head of Biocon. The other 2 panelists today are co-authors of a new book on Kiran and Biocon, and that's the book. They are prolific author and corporate advisor R.Gopalakrishnan and Sushmita Srivastava, Associate Professor at S.P. Jain Institute of Management. Before I begin my conversation with them, do send your questions in as we proceed with the discussion. And at the end of our discussion, we will have a Q&A with the panelists. Tata Starbucks will give coupons for the best 5 questions. And thank you for joining in. Here we go. So welcome all 3 of you. Kiran, congratulations. You're making a lot of waves with what you're doing against the coronavirus, fight against coronavirus. In fact, it's so funny that the first reference to it was not on Indian television, but on an American TV station, where the anchor expressed surprise. He said, there's great news about the coronavirus fight from India. And then he talked about you and Biocon. So how is it going now?
So, Anil, this is a very, very interesting drug which I had basically licensed from Cuba almost 20 years ago. And in fact, Gopal and Sushmita actually covered it in their book, in this book of which they've written on me and Biocon. And in fact, they reminded me of so many things about this molecule which I've even forgotten about. But this is a unique molecule because it basically has a very, very unique mechanism of action against, hyperimmune reactions in the body. So when we actually looked at what was happening to patients who were, being infected by coronavirus, the thought came to me that, hey, this seems to be actually a drug that could actually address this problem, what they call as the cytokine storm. And that got me thinking, and I said, maybe we should repurpose it for COVID and see whether it works. I discussed it with the company in the US to whom I had licensed this drug for various other kind of indications that have to do with immune modulation. And they also agreed with me that it was worth trying out. So based on that rationale, and that scientific, rationale, I went to the drugs controller in India and said I'd like to do a proof of concept study. And if it worked, I would like them to give me an emergency use approval, because this is already an approved drug in India with a lot of safety data. So based on that, we actually conducted a very small study in Mumbai and Delhi, and we got some startling results that all the people or the patients who were pretty severe, who took the drug, actually recovered, and in the arm that did not get the drug, 30% or 3 of the 10 patients did not make it. So this kind of made me realize that this drug actually does what we thought it would do. And based on that, of course, now we are going to do a larger clinical trial in the US. And we are also basically doing what they call a phase 4 study in India on a larger number of patients. Of course, in the meantime, of course, we have already treated over 1,000 patients, and it's really doing what it's supposed to do, which is saving lives.
But tell me,
that's what I can tell you about.
At what stage were they in terms of the coronavirus? Were they just starting off, or they were in middle stages, or what?
So these patients are quite serious because, they are the patients who have very low oxygen levels. they get into what is called as hypoxia. So their oxygen levels are almost like at that 80% and below levels. And they are also breathless. They are on high levels of oxygen, which only because of that they can kind of keep breathing. So when you actually give the drug, we are seeing a very quick response to lowering oxygen levels in terms of needs. And then within a few days, they are coming off that oxygen levels, and in a few weeks, they are being discharged. So it's quite interesting what the drug is doing, because it actually downregulates the cytokine storm. And the beauty of this is that it actually is, the mechanism is very well known as to how it is reducing the inflammatory markers. It's inflammation in your lungs that's actually preventing you from taking more oxygen. So when the inflammation reduces, obviously your lungs can again breathe easy again, to put it very in a layperson's language. And the drug is called Alzumab. And this is something which I believe is going to be very transformational for Biocon, because it is a path-breaking drug, and we hope that it will deliver on this promise.
Okay, before I come to Gopal and Sushmita, just one further question on this. Do you have a time frame for it?
So, we hope that, the US partners will be able to start doing this study very soon. And hopefully by early next year, we should get a very global readout on this particular drug. So it can be as soon as early next year, if all goes well.
All the best. I think our hopes are tied up a lot with Biocon. Gopal and Sushmita has a very interesting book, which I read quite thoroughly, let me tell you. There's one particular phrase which comes right in the beginning, in your preface, in fact, and goes right through the book, which I'd like you to talk about. You're talking of Rainforest Rules. Now, this is not a phrase I've often heard. Tell me what does it mean?
Sushmita, would you like me to go? Shall I answer that?
Sir, you should go ahead and I'll add on.
When amongst the 6 companies we chose in the series, Biocon was the only company which is biotechnology, biology based, and even the language that the people in the company spoke was one of uncertainty, unpredictability, risk, as compared to some of the other companies. Now, this concept of the rainforest has long fascinated, at least for a year, I think, fascinated me. And I read a book on it called The Rainforest Effect. And basically what it says is that if you think of a rainforest, the Amazon rainforest, things just seem to be happening on their own. Vines climb, roots are sprouting, some creatures die, but there's enormous foliage. And the ecosystem.
So you're saying there's no intervention, human intervention?
No intervention. And the focus of the system seems to be on effectiveness. Everything that arrives should learn to collaborate and live. But when I come and look at agriculture or industry, which we are familiar with, cultivated agriculture, I call it, they are all very manicured. They must be repeatable processes. You must study them 10 times and then must make it happen again. So the rainforest tends to be all the parts contributing to the center and operating independently. And the cultivated agriculture or the industrial model is center and top-down instructions. That's the sort of broad definitions. And I found that many things in the Biocon story, as we dug into it, seem to become like the rainforest. And the great inspiration for me was, how did Silicon Valley come out? That's not written in this book. Obviously, that's not the subject of this book. But Silicon Valley has never been replicated anywhere in the world because it came up through Rainforest Rules. But maybe I should defer to Sushmita to illustrate one or two things that struck us as the rainforest phenomena in Biocon. By the way, nobody in Biocon ever used that word. We just heard them and we
No, but I'm still mystified, because you're saying on one hand that rainforest happens by itself, but Biocon didn't happen by itself. It was made to happen by Kiran.
No. Let's get this right. When I say rainforest happens by itself, the rainforest didn't create itself. Nature's rules created the rainforest. And I'm saying many nature's rules or entrepreneurial rules created Biocon. That's the metaphor. Neither did Biocon create itself, nor did the rainforest create itself. It is nature's rules which created both.
Okay, Sushmita, you want to add something to that?
Not really. Actually, we were trying to look at institution building. And, in the current context, where the world is getting so complex and the pharma industry itself is so complicated with working in a very stringent, regulated, controlled environment, we felt that the analogy of rainforest kind of fits in because there's so much of uncertainty, you don't really know which path is going to lead where. And in this context, this whole, the idea of coexistence in harmony and in a very harmonized environment where you have to strike out balance is something which organizations increasingly will have to do, especially those in the life sciences industry. And because they say we are living in a biocentury these days and life sciences is becoming so important, perhaps that's the reason why we took this analogy of the rainforest.
Right.
So maybe I'd like to kind of add to this. Basically, I have been an entrepreneur who has been very driven by innovation, an innovation philosophy, which, as you know, inherently innovation is unpredictable. You have to shape it. Nothing is there to to sort of give you a formal structure. So innovation itself is something you have to shape. And in the process of shaping that strategy of innovation, I think that's what the rainforest metaphor applies, because you have different parts of the organization that need to do different things to shape that innovation, to harmonize and then align everything that you're trying to do to deliver on that innovation. So I think that's the way I've developed the company, saying, what is this unmet need we are trying to address? And in that process of addressing that unmet need, we are trying to look at various aspects of the business model that need to then finally deliver on taking that idea from the lab to the market. So that's what the rainforest effect is all about, which is that you get different people thinking about how to get to the marketplace in different ways. But ultimately, you come to a point where it all converges and you finally get to the market in a very aligned, thoughtful way. And I think that's the way I've developed the company, where I've given people the freedom to think, to ideate, and to develop and shape.
Yeah, but Kiran, if we go back to the beginning of how Biocon started, it was certainly quite an incredible start, because you didn't know anything about the subject to start with.
No, I knew a lot about the subject.
No, you started as a master brewer and then...
Yeah, but that's biotech as well.
Yeah, but to take that leap from there to what you did when you joined the Biocon British company, started it in India, was in a way a leap of faith.
Well, my entrepreneurial journey was certainly a leap of faith.
Calculated risk? Do you think it was a calculated risk?
Actually, it was not a calculated risk. It was a wild risk, okay? Because I think I started off as an entrepreneur. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I never planned to run a business. I always planned to be a professional, okay? And when that did not happen, I often say that I started Biocon because of a gender bias. And because of that, I decided that there was an opportunity to become an entrepreneur, and I said, why not take up that challenge? So I had no clue about how to run a business, but I knew a lot about science, I knew a lot about biotech, I knew a lot about fermentation. And I thought, okay, those are at least the starting ingredients of building this business, which I felt was a sort of a science-led, biotech-led business, which I thought I had a head start on. And that's what got me to start, shaping the business.
Yeah. Gopal, you use this phrase shapers in the book quite a bit. When you talk of Kiran, you're saying that there are very few people who are actual shapers, and she's one of them. Uh, well, one particular phrase struck me very forcefully, which was that a shaper allows even weeds to grow. Now, I would have thought that weeds suck away the nutrients from the main plants, so they should be hacked away. But you're stating the opposite. Can you talk about that?
I have stated the opposite in the context of a rainforest. In cultivated agriculture, the moment you see a weed, you'll use a weedicide and get rid of it. Exactly as you said. Because you want to be highly focused and concentrated. In a rainforest, the weed may do its own thing and the creeper or the plant may do its own thing. Now, in a company where there's a shaper operating, they allow all sorts of apparently unrelated things to happen on the side, They give them the freedom to do that. And I use the word shaper to distinguish that business leader from a good CEO. A good CEO of a good company. There are lots of them, good CEOs of good companies. But a shaper of an institution, we distinguished, my colleagues and I, in several ways which are reflected in the table in the book. And allowing things to happen and not sort of killing things that are apparently inefficient is one of the marks of a shaper. And Kiran just a few minutes ago referred to the fact that once we set our goal, I let people do things, and you see how she has repurposed Itolizumab. What is it?
Itolizumab. Yeah.
Itolizumab. I mean, she goes to Cuba, she meets some guy, she listens to his presentation, her husband speaks Spanish, so they land up there. Instead of spending an hour, they spend 5 hours. She takes an instant decision to license the molecule. She develops it for some other purpose, psoriasis. And then 3 years ago, she said, hey, why can't you do something else? This is what I mean by saying what might have been otherwise thought of. It's turned out that she's done it right. But there are a lot of other things the organization must have tried which have not seen the light of day. So the word weed was very appropriate to a rainforest. And I thought that's one more example of how we saw Biocon.
Yeah, but I would also think that intuition plays a large part in this, because Kiran, what made you go to Cuba of all places? It's not known for this field, it's at least generally, and normally people would go to the US, I suppose, and here you are going to Cuba.
So Anil, actually, contrary to what you just said. Yeah. Let me tell you, Cuba is very well known for biotechnology. In fact, you'll be very surprised to know that the one thing that Fidel Castro did when he had to fend for himself was he said we should focus on two very important things. One is we must focus on biotechnology because he felt that biotech had answers to a lot of healthcare issues, and the second was healthcare itself. So they have this huge focus on the healthcare industry, the whole healthcare sector in Cuba is very well respected the world over. And when the reason I went to Cuba is very simple. I found that I could not get access to some very important, technology for monoclonal antibodies from either US or Europe because it was a very coveted technology. And I read about Cuba's biotechnology and I said, well, at least Cuba probably will be the place which will be, ready to share this technology with me because they are so cash-strapped, they are so, there's so much embargo against it that I'm sure they will be willing to share this technology with me. And that is what really got me to go to Cuba way back in 2000. And, my husband, of course, was Spanish-speaking, though it wasn't so important to speak Spanish because all the researchers spoke English. But as Gopal very rightly mentioned, a 1 hour meeting turned out to be a 5 hour meeting because I was fascinated with the kind of research they were doing. And two molecules grabbed my attention which I licensed, and one of them was itolizumab. It wasn't called itolizumab when I licensed it, but I managed to bring it back to India. I developed it, got it named itolizumab, and so I really believe this is an innovated in India product, which in fact the Cubans now actually acknowledge that we've done most of that work. And I think in the book, in fact, Gopal reminded me that our scientists got the gold medal from the Cuban Science Academy. So that is how important this molecule is. And I hope that I can really leverage the promise of this very unique molecule in a big way.
Yeah. Sushmita, for you, writing this book with Gopal must be a new experience, because you're a professor, and whatever you've done is more in academia, and here you're going into a corporate world. Now, the other day when I talked to you, you were speaking about critical thinking as being the important thought process that you notice. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So if you really look at the history of Biocon across 4 decades, that Kiran has led this organization, there were a number of events which we typically can call them like black swan events. And she had to deal with this dynamics of handling these black swan events. And how did she do it? These events were rare. I mean, at the time they occurred, she would not, in retrospective, when we look at it retrospectively, we can say, oh, it was predictable. But at the time these events happened in course of these 4 decades, they were completely, out of the blue. And the way Kiran actually handled them was through a process of critical thinking. Now, what is this process of critical thinking? It's about a path which is quite risk-infested, embedded with a lot of risks. And what Kiran did was outline a very structured process of thinking, process of thinking critically, which helped to, make it risk, free. Now, how did she do that? There are a couple of events in these 4 decades that are exemplary in explaining this phenomenon. I'm sure Kiran will supplement what I'm saying. It all began, let me tell you about a couple of events where it came out very clearly. It was a nice morning in the year 1988 when she went across to meet the chairman of ICICI Bank, Mr. Narayan Bagul. And that was a time when Kiran really desperately needed money to ramp up her technology of solid state fermentation. Now, in those days, there was no startup ecosystem, and yet she needed the money desperately. Now, what could she do? This discussion actually led to a lot of revelation. One of which was that the ICICI had started a venture capital fund, and based on the promise of her idea and her technology, they invested up to 1 crore rupees in the business. Now, Kiran took this forward, just like the MAP technology of itolizumab. She really took it to working on that technology, making it successful, and now that's a patented technology for Biocon. Now, what did she do in this process was, one, of course, spot an opportunity. She did not lie low, but try to explore how she could get that fund, spotting the opportunity, then, of course, defining the risks involved. She failed quite a bit in trying to implement it, but then that did not deter her. After defining the risk, she planned for mitigating that risk. She had a very definite action plan, and finally she scaled it up. So I think this process of taking on risks and de-risking critical path and with these efforts are evident in a couple of other stories in her life journey, which both Mr. Gopalakrishnan and me were very excited about and exploring, especially when she was moving from a very low-end enzyme technology, which was operating in an unregulated market, to a very high-end, stringent biopharmaceutical business. This was in the year 1988, 10 years down the line. And the whole process of getting onto this new, league of manufacturing biopharmaceuticals was a very, very difficult one. And again, we see that, Kiran deployed the same critical thinking process. She tried to de-risk what looked very risky. and through this process of critical thinking was able to make this transition very effectively.
Yeah, when we talk of risk, de-risk, the risk-reward ratio, I would think that anyone starting a new initiative would take these into account, would analyze the risks, would look at the risk-reward ratio. Wouldn't that be so, Gopal? Why is it so unique to Biocon?
Well, the way I read the story, and I could empathize with it having led corporations, is that very often a corporation is working in a field where the path has been trodden by somebody else before. So some of the risks are known. So if I am driving for the first time in my life from Bombay to Delhi, I will have a map which will say there's a petrol pump after 40 miles, there's a restaurant after 50 miles, and I may not find it. That's a risk. But it's not a. But if I am asked to go to the moon, where nobody else has been, then it's a different kind of risk. I prepare for all of them, but still. So I'm very impressed. I mean, I'm exaggerating now. I don't know if I'm exaggerating, but from an entrepreneur's point of view, it's probably a valid thing. When Shackleton went to the Antarctica, it is a totally different kind of risk than a Formula One race. And I think the risk of uncertainty, and don't forget, all entrepreneurs are inadvertent liars. I use that word to mean that they see the positive side, and many of them just gloss over the negative side because they want to pitch it to a financier. And I think the ability to sit down and cold-bloodedly look at the risks, as many as you can think of, and provide a mitigating response to that is not a very common thing amongst entrepreneurs, in my opinion. I don't know what Kiran feels, but I fully support what Sushmita said about this risk mitigation, which is of a distinctive nature in new industries.
Well, Kiran, when Sushmita just mentioned Bagul, and that was a very rare thing that you got money. In fact, if I remember in the book, you didn't actually expect them to take a share in the company. You thought that they'd give you a loan or something like that. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that was quite an inflection point for me because I found it very difficult for financial institutions to take the risk along with me because they just felt that I was taking an unknown risk, a big risk, and they felt that they were not prepared to give me risk capital, let's put it that way, because they felt that this was risk capital. And they kept telling me, why can't you just, license a technology? Why do you want to develop your own technology? That's a big risk. So, I was really getting frustrated because I kept telling them that, look, this is what my business is about. My business is innovation led. I cannot be licensing somebody else's work and then trying to run with it. So I couldn't get them to buy into taking that risk with me. And so when I went and met Mr. Vagul, he immediately understood what I was trying to do. And he got very excited with the kind of technology I was trying to develop. And he said, hey, this is exactly the kind of venture funding we want to do. So rather than giving you a loan, which is what I went to him for, he said, look, I'm going to take an equity stake in you because this is a very exciting technology you're trying to develop. And the beauty was that he not only gave me more than what I had asked for because he felt I was asking for too little, but he also, made a lot of, return on that investment because in less than a year, Unilever actually acquired my Irish partners and they felt that the most valuable part of that investment was in India and they needed as much of the stake they could get in my company and they realized that there was a small stake taken by ICICI Ventures or the TDICI as it was called then. And so they immediately did a transaction with them which got them 4 times what they had done, invested in less than a year. So I think that gave them the confidence and so I enjoyed a very good track record with ICICI thereafter. Yeah. And I think what I wanted to also say to what Sushmita and Gopal said was that, what I have done, I think, is taking unknown risks. So I've had to kind of chart a path which others have not been on before.
What Gopal said was going to the moon.
Yeah, it was a bit like that because nobody had built a biotech company before. Nobody had, developed biopharmaceuticals before. Nobody had even developed biosimilars before. And now I'm trying to develop proprietary, innovative drugs from India, which nobody has really succeeded in before. So I think all these tell you that I am willing to take very, very bold risks and unknown risks, because I also don't know whether it will really play out in the way I want to or not. So I think that's what I'm willing to do, but I don't bet the bank, let's put it that way. I do take measured risks because I know I have something to fall back on.
Okay.
It's worth adding, if I may, just to the point Kiran made, that Biocon and Genentech are approximately contemporaries. Genentech is the world's biggest biotechnology company. Both started around 1978, 1980. Is that right, Kiran?
Genentech was a few years before me, but
yes,
yes.
2 years difference, yes.
Yeah.
Just 2 years, which is nothing actually when you think about it. So the first ever company started only 2 years before Biocon.
Yeah.
So I want to ask this question of all three of you. How much does intuition play a part in this kind of venture? When you're taking, a leap really into uncharted territory, is it a gut feeling or is it analyzing it very deeply, looking at all the pros and cons, or is it a mix of the two?
So I am led by a lot of gut feel and intuition, but then of course I back it with a scientific rationale. See, one thing about me is that I'm very technology driven, I'm very science driven. If the science appeals to me, if the technology appeals to me, I take an intuitive decision on that technology or the science. So I am very science led, technology led, data led in that sense. But I don't sit and analyze the pros and cons and see whether I should do it or shouldn't. Once I have that gut feel that this is something, I'm onto something, I take that bet. And I would say in 90% of the cases, I think I have not gone wrong.
It's fantastic. And Gopal, would you say that this is true of all the startups that are happening in India, or are they more followers than leaders?
No, I think my first book I wrote in 2007 was called The Case of the Bonsai Manager. And the thesis there, the theme there was precisely this, where managers are trained to be highly analytical, and they should be, knowledge-driven, cognitive-driven. But there comes a certain place in the journey where you don't have any more knowledge. And therefore, you have to use your wisdom or intuition or judgment, whatever you might call it, which is residing in your brain. You may call it intuition. Some people don't like the word. They prefer the word judgment. I'm not going to fuss about it. So knowledge and judgment are part of the same journey linearly. And when you exhaust it, like I want to acquire a company. If I give 5 accountants the job of valuing the company, I'll get 10 answers. And if I tell them what answer I want, I'll get the 11th one as well. So you have to then take a judgment call, what Kiran referred to. And I do believe all our lives, the most important decisions we take are based on judgment, like whom to marry. You can't analyze it. Whom to stay married to. If you analyze it, you'll be divorced before you know what's happening. So our most important decisions are taken by judgment. The thing about a new field like biotechnology is that the amount of known pathway is rather limited and the amount of judgment increases. So Kiran devised this method, if I may use that word devised, that I better think of all the risk mitigation measures in advance. And as she said, 90% or 80% worked and 20% did.
I just wanted to add here that one of the very big decisions that Kiran took was selling off her enzyme business to Novozyme. And what I really found there was she kept her emotion away from making rational decisions. And although she was very committed to the technology and was very, very possessive about it, but when it really came to making a prudent business decision, I don't think she deterred from selling this technology to one of the partners, Novozyme, who was a competitor, but at the same time she enjoyed very good relationships with them. So I think intuition, I would think that yes, while making judgments, there were certain protocols that she followed, and which eventually led to a lot of success because she got a lot of money from that transaction, which she was able to then plow back into the pharmaceutical business. So I just thought I would cite this example. And Kiran, would you like to comment on this?
No, in fact, I want to ask Kiran, have you ever regretted that decision?
No, I just want to, expand on what Sushmita said. Look, this was an inflection point in my business journey where, I had found that this whole biopharmaceuticals business was very exciting. It was going to really give me my next bolus of growth. And I felt that that was the journey I wanted to really now pursue, which was to really start developing these very high-end biologics, which was going to differentiate me from the rest of the Indian pharma companies. So again, my sort of my entrepreneurial strategy has been about differentiation. How different can I be? How unique can I be? That has always been my kind of driving strategy. And so when I did that, I realized that biopharma requires a lot of money to be invested in. And I didn't have that kind of capital at that stage. So what I did was I said, okay, look, enzymes, I've done a good job up till now, but I really have to now, it's a toss-up. Do I invest in enzymes or do I invest in biopharma? And if I do both, I'm going to, actually not do justice to either. So I felt that now if I want to get into biopharma, I'll have to give up on the enzymes business. And I said, let me unlock the maximum value I can from my enzymes business because I've developed some really good proprietary technology and then use that to fuel my biopharma business. And that's what I did. So once you take that decision, then you become unemotional because you're doing it for a certain reason, a certain purpose. And you have to be fired by a sense of purpose that allows you to then take those very, very difficult decisions. Let's put it that way. So I was emotionally bound to my historic enzymes business, the enzyme technologies that we had developed, the proprietary technologies that we had developed. But then I had to take that hard decision. Because why? Because my purpose had shifted from enzymes to biopharma. And then it didn't worry me that I was actually unlocking value to fuel this business. Right. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs do that. And I think if you stay too wedded to something just because of an emotional connect, you might not be doing the right thing.
Sushmita, in writing the book, I think you met a lot of people at Biocon. And did you notice a particular people orientation in the company?
Oh yes, several of them, and some of them are mentioned in the book in terms of anecdotal references, but one that I particularly liked, which I would like to share here, when I met her, the direct reports, I also met many people who had retired from the organization and had started off on their own. So I spoke to a cross section of people in the company, and what really struck me from there was that Kiran actually encourages dissent in the organization. She's very open to having contrarian views being put up to her. And one such example was, there was a chief of R&D with whom she would frequently have heated arguments because he used to have a point of view. So in one such occasion when she was deliberating and arguing with him in his room, there were some visitors sitting outside. And they were hearing all this cacophony coming from inside. And when the meeting ended, they just rushed in to say that, have you just fired this man who left your room? And Kiran just laughed it off and said, no, I mean, that's the way I deal with my people. I like my key talent to argue with me and put their point of view. And that was so interesting. And, and this gentleman, of course, is no longer with the organization, but you recall this very fondly. I heard another person say that, Kiran, they used a Hindi phrase which I'd like to quote here. They said that, Kiran knows the difference between gussa ana or gussa dikhana, which means getting angry and showing that you are angry. And she really knows the fine difference between the two. They would say that after a heated argument, while their adrenaline would be quite high, Kiran would be absolutely cool and she would just venture into the next subject as though nothing had happened. The other things I heard people say that she has a lot of, questioning skills. She questions the deepest of scientific endeavor, and the scientists are like taken off guard because the questions are so precise and authentic. So I think her people relations is all about empowering them, engaging them, and the interesting part is that some of her early team members, served the organization for as long as 2 to 3 decades, which is very interesting, which we would not see in today's organization. So her ability to...
In fact,
yes,
I was very struck that many of them said that they were made to feel like co-founders.
Absolutely.
Which is quite incredible. When you think about it.
Well, they were co-founders because all of us shared responsibilities, and I still have such a good bond with all of them. In fact, the one that Sushmita talked about is now an entrepreneur on his own rights. In fact, most of my founding members are doing, except for my CEO who has just retired. All of them have become entrepreneurs, which is great, and I'm also very proud of the fact that, someone did a little exercise on how many, startups or enterprises have been spawned from Biocon, and at the last count, it was almost 100, which I'm really delighted to hear about.
Right. So, how often did you practice gussa dikhana?
No, I think, I always have a discussion based on the business, the science, or the technology. And I think there, obviously, I want to get into a very, very, deep discussion on the science and the technology. And when someone is not explaining the science properly, obviously, I get very annoyed and angry saying, come on, explain it to me better. This shows that you don't understand the science as deeply as I think you should. Or for instance, if there's a technology problem and I'm getting into a discussion as to how do we solve this technological problem, and when I feel that they're not using their knowledge enough, obviously I get angry and say, come on, let's think about it in a deeper way. That's the kind of anger that they're talking about. It's the anger that I'm showing because they haven't thought about it deeply enough.
Right. Gopal, in the book you're talking of, you're quoting Kiran, I think, and you're talking of 1 billion patients and not $1 billion, that being your emphasis. Now, if you were a shareholder in Biocon, would you rather not have the $1 billion?
I think any investor reaction to that question would be, yes, I'd like to have $1 billion. Yeah. But long-range investors like to see whether a company has a philosophy and a strategy to be an infinite player of the game rather than a finite player of the game. And since you asked the question to me, I would always look at whether the company's top management team, the top leadership team is able to balance instant gratification with long-term development. And I would much rather have a person who says, I want to influence 1 billion patients and I will still make profits, than to say, I'll give you $1 billion day after tomorrow. I am not very strongly, because I've worked in Tata's and Unilever, maybe I've been influenced by their philosophies, but I don't think it's a bad philosophy. I spent 50 years, very happy years there. That doing good to people will automatically bring profits. But profits will not necessarily do good to people. And therefore, I come from that philosophy.
But my philosophy is a little different. These are not mutually exclusive. I think what you have to understand is, what is your focus? Is it the 1 billion patients or the $1 billion? To me, it's about the 1 billion patients. Patients come first because that's what my business is serving. The billions will follow. I have no doubt that the billions will follow. But if I'm going to chase the money, I am not true to my purpose, and it's not a good purpose anyway. And that's the distinction I wanted to make, saying it's about the billion patients, not the $1 billion.
Well, that's not the way international pharma companies think.
But, you know, I don't agree with that way of thinking either, Anil. And I also believe that because of the fact that my shareholders believe in the way I'm doing my business and going about pursuing my business, I also enjoy a very high, market cap or a multiple of PE multiple, because my shareholders believe in what I'm doing. So I don't think it's all about the money. It's about the purpose. It's about your mission. And I think it's about the values of that mission, which I always believe what a company should be judged by. And that's why, like Gopal said, it's about the culture of Tatas, the culture of Unilever. Those are the kind of, cultural traits I want to imbibe.
Yeah. Shall we go to questions? Because there's a lot of questions coming in.
Sure.
But one thing, Kiran, and this is not a trick question, but I did notice that the people who played a very important part in your whole journey, starting with Les Auchincloss of Biocon. Then there was, of course, Mr. Vagul. Then a gentleman called George Shaw,
Yes.
who went and married. Then, as your inspiration, you mentioned Mohammed Yunus also. Now, they all happen to be men.
And my father, my late father.
Okay. Now, they're all men. Now,
Yes.
what does that say about the gender imbalance in our culture?
Well, I think, the truth is that the people that you just mentioned are the thought leaders in my kind of area, okay? And at the same time, if you ask me who are the women who inspire me, I think my mother inspires me tremendously even today, okay? Because she is an entrepreneur of her own rights. And of course, I have a very strong a group of women entrepreneurs. Vinita Bali is a very good friend of mine. I get inspired by a lot of my fellow, business women or business colleagues. I have a lot of other women who I interact with, globally. They are also people who, we inspire each other. But the people you've handpicked are the ones who made the most impression in my entrepreneurial journey. And at that time, obviously, there were no women whom I could kind of relate to. And for me, I am not gender biased, okay? I draw inspiration from anyone who really I can, engage with and connect with. So I think, yes, Les Auchincloss was a great influence in my life because he's the one that, taught me how to become an entrepreneur. I think Vagul is one of my mentors, who really, invested in me and believed in me and gave me that confidence. In fact, his brother, Bala Manyan, is another great, friend of mine who I get inspired with because he's the one that believes in innovation. He's the one that really believes in itolizumab and told me, Kiran, go for it, I agree with you. Then, of course, I have the other, my husband, of course, my late father was the one who made me pursue brewing and so on and so forth. So, and Devi Shetty is someone else who inspires me because of his business model. But, I think you should not go by just the fact that there are no other women influencers in my life, because there are. There are women who influence me in a different way, because I really respect them, I really admire them, and I really learn from some of the things they have taught me. So I really don't necessarily want to make it feel that only men have influenced me in my life.
Right. Now, in fact, there is a question relating to this from Emma Cianterelli. Did you, Kiran, experience gender bias in your journey? And
Of
if
course.
so, did you tackle it?
I experienced very, very severe gender bias right from the time when I got turned down as a brewer. I couldn't get a job as a brewer, if you remember, and that's why I started my own company. But even when I started my own company, of course, the first 3 or 4 years were very tough because, women just had no, acceptance in the business world. I mean, banks were so reluctant to lend to me. People didn't want to work for a woman employer. And of course, I was considered to be high risk in every sense of the word. So I always, the story will tell you that my first 2 employees were retired tractor mechanics because they needed a job, right? I couldn't get professionals to join me. I got professionals to join me almost after a year and a half. And that too, not the kind of professionals I was looking for, but slowly they also started joining me, like the IIT engineers and others who started joining me after about 3 years. So it wasn't easy in the early days. And then of course, when I started building the business, again, I've had a lot of flack from people who used to taunt me saying she doesn't know what she's doing. Oh, I don't know whether you should invest in Biocon because this woman is taking wild risks and she's investing so much in R&D. I don't think you should be investing in this kind of a company. I got badly taunted and challenged for, why can't you do what your male colleagues are doing? Why are you taking such risks? They are so successful and you are actually taking your shareholders for a ride. This is the kind of comments I got, and in fact, much to the dismay of my colleagues at work, I said, if you don't believe in our business, don't invest in us. Those were the kind of responses I used to give, and they used to get very upset saying, what are you saying, Kiran? You can't make such statements. But I said, look, I really want people to believe in what I'm doing. I want people to understand what innovation is all about. And, so I'm that kind of an entrepreneur who wants shareholders who invest in me to really share this ride with me, this risk with me, this innovation-led journey with me. So, to answer your question, that's the way I've gone about my business.
Well, Gopal, you've been associated with very large companies, and you must have interviewed so many people for a job. Now, what are the major differences that you see between women applicants and male applicants?
I don't know if I can make a generic statement, but I found, and I'm not trying to be popular on this, I found women thought very differently from men. And the question for me in a selection situation was, do I want to get that skill in my group or not? That was the single thing that leaps out at me, because I consider men to be geologists and women to be astronomers. If a geologist stood on top of this planet, he would start digging and going into the planet to find out there's soil, water, nitrogen, copper, zinc. An astronomer would look up to the sky and say, what is this earth a part of? And women are astronomers and men are geologists.
That's beautifully put, Gopal.
So if I want a good team, I would like to have 2 geologists and 2 astronomers so that I know what is the potential of what I'm doing. Though I have to say that in the situation that I grew up my career in, perhaps we ended up having more geologists than astronomers, but that's a separate matter.
So you didn't choose astronomers?
No, it was not always my choice. I mean, you were working in a certain environment in those days in the 70s and 80s. Yeah. And I'm not blaming anybody, but if you ask me what would you do differently if you had to repeat your career, I would get more astronomers around the table. Why I didn't do it or why the company didn't do it is an old matter. That's why I'm working with SP Jain, where I'm dealing with 5 women professors. I mean, this is only one of the books. There are 5 other books. So yeah, it's been a great, rewarding journey for me as well.
You're making up for lost time, I can see.
Yeah.
Here's a question, a Starbucks coupon winner from Rajpreet Sohn. Kiran, do you have moments of doubt as an innovator? And how do you deal with these moments?
Well, obviously, when you're on an innovation journey, not everything will work, and of course, you will have failures along the way. I don't give up that easily, but of course, if things really don't work, and if the answer is staring at me saying, listen, you're flogging a dead horse, obviously I realize that it's not going to work. So I've had failures along the way, but at the same time, the few innovative, really innovative programs that I'm working on, you have to have a lot of belief in that innovation. And of course, for me, that innovation is about science. And so when the science is exciting, I don't give up that easily.
Here's a question which I would like to put to all three of you. From Aruna Venkat, another Starbucks coupon winner. Should India concentrate on low-cost innovation developed in local and rural areas and which is very affordable, and I suppose not go for the big ambitious kind of innovations?
So can I start by saying,
please.
To me,
like three different perspectives.
Yeah, I want to give you a different perspective. I believe that innovation is so important and exciting for India because we are very globally competitive in innovation for the simple reason that the cost of failure in innovation is very, very affordable. Okay, that's the way I look at innovation. Saying if I had to innovate anywhere in the world, it should be in India because the cost of failure is so affordable. If I had to do the same project in, say, the US or Europe, let me tell you, it would be very expensive to fail. And so therefore, that's our competitive advantage of innovating in India. So I'll let Gopal and Sushmita talk about other aspects of that question.
Gopal?
Sushmita? No. Sushmita, do you want to go? Shall I go?
Sir, you please kindly go ahead.
They are vectors pointing in opposite directions. Cost, low cost, is an input you apply to the process of innovation. The innovation itself is an output which is solving somebody's problem. So I don't think innovation can be low cost focused or high cost focused. Innovation has to solve somebody's problem. And if there are enough people who have that problem, now that might be tribal people living in the forest area. It may be very wealthy people who are suffering from diabetes in the United States, right? Kiran has got drugs which can do both. Now what you put into it is a low cost. She is able to sell her glargine insulin in the United States at 10% of the cost of its competition. Am I right, Kiran? About 10%, 15%. But she'll probably make a very decent margin on it. If she's extremely greedy, dollar focus rather than patient focus, she would have sold it for the same price as the current ones. But then she wants to build a big market. She wants to touch the billion patients rather than $1 billion. The $1 billion will follow. So I think they are not opposite polarities. Innovation must solve problems. Cost is something you apply to it, and if you're in India, it will be a low cost.
Right. Sushmita?
Quickly, I would say that innovation needs to be need-driven rather than cost-pushed. And if there is a need, and if you have been able to identify a need which can be met, with innovative thinking, I think one should go ahead. And I think that's the answer today, because the times that we live in, we are not going to look at big-time innovation which has cost involved, but even simple innovation in our day-to-day work can lead to great benefits.
May I add one example here?
Yeah.
India has sent a mission to Mars, Chandrayaan, at 10% of the cost of the similar mission that the United States has done. They are both solving exactly the same problem, getting onto Mars and doing something or the other. And it's an apocryphal story, but it's worth mentioning, that the team came from NASA to interview ISRO people. They said, how did you manage to do this for such a low cost? He said, can I reverse the question? How did you manage to spend so much money on it? So it's a question of solving the problem, and your cost structure is something that you put in.
Yeah. And your cost of innovation is low anyway. So I also believe that today, if you look at the corona crisis that we are in today, I think it throws up a lot of problems. And finding solutions to that problem also throws up huge innovation opportunities. And I think it's not about just the cost, it's about solving an unmet need, solving a problem. That's what drives innovations. So I think if you're going to be fixated on rural, fixated on cost, you will miss the innovation opportunity. You have to think about what are you addressing.
Yeah, you're talking of corona, the coronavirus. Now, what we find is that there are lots and lots of companies trying to find vaccines or other kinds of answers. Obviously, it's an emergency situation, so there has to be a concentration of all research in this subject, yes, for sure. But is competition necessarily the best way of doing this? I was wondering, as a layman, wouldn't companies come together and say that let's pool our research, let's
It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way, Anil.
To the Second World War, the USA had this Manhattan Project, which worked single-mindedly, got all the best brains there to work on that atom bomb at that point. Now, is that possible in this scenario now, that you don't have competition but cooperation to find a weapon against the virus?
So I think the way the innovation is working today is that there are multiple efforts to finding a vaccine. And I think it's using the same principles that at least the probability of success if 3 or 4 people work on a vaccine will be high. But if you just have one effort and if it fails, then the world suffers. So I think we have to look at innovation in that way, saying that the more vaccine programs there are, the probability of success only increases. But if you all had only one vaccine program that everybody focused on, and if it didn't work, the world would be in a worse place. So that's the way I look at innovation, and I would not want only one effort to be, the prime effort of the world. I think it's important for countries to innovate and find different ways of solving this problem. And I think there's an important aspect of how, we as a country have been very good at manufacturing, but we haven't really focused on innovation. Like, let's look at vaccines itself, okay? So we are the world's largest vaccine producer by volume. But are we the world's vaccine innovator? The answer is no. And why? Because we have only focused on low-cost vaccine production, to the other question that you asked.
Yeah.
We should now be focusing on zoonotic viruses, which really are plenty in our environment. Let's face it, we are the kind of countries where you have the maximum number of zoonotic viruses, because the way we live and, in our sort of underdeveloped parts of the world, and the way we, relate to animals in our kind of ecosystems is very different to the very advanced developed parts of the world. So shouldn't we be doing much more research on zoonotic viruses? We have got chikungunya, we have got dengue, we have, of course, the world has corona, the COVID-19. But look at the number of viruses we can deal with and find innovative solutions to. And yet it's the Western research that is trying to find answers to our problems. So I think we have done ourselves a huge disservice of not investing in that kind of research, which actually could be a huge opportunity for India. So I think now we need to look into this whole area, saying why have we neglected the neglected diseases, which the rest of the world has done.
Gopal, in your vast experience, and also you've been writing so much recently, have you found a tendency in India for innovation to actually not be innovation, but following something which has already happened in the West, and you try and to tweak it or do something similar in whatever field it is? And why do you think so?
Innovation is a subject close to my heart because for 10 years I chaired the Tata Group Innovation Forum, and it exposed me to many companies and many business schools and so on. And there are innovations in various types, from very dark to very fair, to use the inappropriate complexion example. There are people who do what you said, just replicate. But there are a lot of people, no, not enough people, who think fundamentally differently. And one of the characteristics, because I told you we did the Shapers research, we found certain characteristics of Shapers. And Shapers are very innovation people. Kiran is the example we discussed today because that's with us. But if you had a similar session on any of the other companies, but we found it very difficult to find institution shapers amongst Indian business community. I must tell you that. So that answers your question. Out of the fact that we have over 20,000 shares listed in the stock market, and if I leave out the centurion companies like Tata Steel, Taj Hotels, who've been around 150 years, we found with great difficulty just 7 or 8 companies who we could all sit together and say, yeah, they are shapers. I'm not saying we were giving away prizes, we were not looking for all the shapers, we wanted to look for 6 shapers about whom we could write. I'm sure there are a few more we could write about, but that's not our project at this point of time. But what is very interesting of all the 6 shaping companies is that each in its own way, each company in its own way, and that shaper's way, based on the context of that company, was very innovative. And they had an innovation which was appropriate for them at that point of time. And I think one of the reasons we did this research and wrote these books is India needs shapers of institutions in pots. It's spoonfuls. And we have too few of them. And we wrote about 6. I wish we could have had 50 candidates. We don't have 50 candidates.
Here's a question from Vasu Ramanujan. Does Biocon have a system of noting failed projects? And apparently 3M does that. So that you can institutionalize the Rainforest Effect.
Yeah, we do. Of course, obviously, we have a way of, capturing our failures and learning from our failures. That's been very inherent in the way we've innovated. So I think failures are something that we track, we learn from, and we certainly have benefited a lot from tracking these kind of failures in our entire journey. I also wanted to mention one more thing, Anil, if I may, about innovation.
Yeah.
Because we haven't had this, this DNA of innovation in our country, because we've never really celebrated innovation in the way we should, I think we are constantly looking for endorsement of our innovation from outside. Only then do we accept it as innovation, which is also very sad. I mean, today we really don't believe in many of our own innovative ideas or products or businesses because we feel we are not good enough. And I think that has to change. I think unless you start believing in innovation and that, you recognize innovation, I think you will not be able to innovate at the scale that, that Gopal just talked about, saying, why are there such few companies? Why does everyone want to follow and not take those bold leads?
Yeah.
I'd like to quickly come in here, Anil, sir, if you can permit me. So I asked a question during my field study at the company that can you tell me how is failure treated, or how does any failure in your innovation handled? And it was an interesting response that I got. So a gentleman said that there's a molecule called anti-CD6, which actually he worked on it for about 7 to 8 years, and really there was nothing coming out of it. So the response he got from the management, and Kiran in particular, is why don't you publish a paper where you highlight the reasons why you have failed? Maybe the world can learn out of it. So I thought that was interesting, because many a times we fail, but we don't document our failures.
But that was a molecule that succeeded.
Finally, I suppose.
Yeah, now that's itolizumab. So there was a lot of failure in that molecule. That, to go back to your question about What did we learn from each step of that failure? Why did we not succeed in making a big success of that CD6 molecule in India? And from that failure, I realized that we were doing the wrong thing by trying to really develop an innovative product in India. And from that failure, I licensed it to the US. And that created a new breath of life, lease of life for that molecule. And because I did that, I'm now able to repurpose it and use it for COVID. So that's a very interesting journey of success and failure of a molecule that was not accepted in this country.
Absolutely. I think that also answers the question of its linkage with the rainforest rule or the rainforest phenomena, where, you know, the journey is not going to be linear. It's going to be topsy-turvy. In a rainforest, you don't know where you're going. There are broad roads, there are narrow, path. You really don't know where you're going, but it has to be iterative. And as you can see, this atolizumab molecule is a great example, I thought.
Here's a question from Shashidhar Kote, Starbucks coupon for him, which is that when you started off, was the Indian image a barrier when you went to develop exports and so on?
Absolutely. I mean, it was a huge barrier because India did not stand for innovation. India did not stand for quality. India did not stand for high tech. So there were a lot of barriers for me in terms of the perception that the outside world had of India. But somehow I had a determination that I was going to change all of that. And I think that's the journey I'm also on, is how do I put India on the map of cutting edge technology, of innovation, of high quality. And I'm doing that because you can see that in my biosimilars, which everybody thought was not possible out of India, I'm I'm considered to be one of the leading companies, and we have probably the largest number of biosimilars approved by US FDA and Europe compared to any of my competitors. So that's a big, accolade that I have given my team, saying, wow, this shows that we've got high quality products being marketed and accepted in the most stringent of regulatory environments. Secondly, innovation. Innovation is also now something that we are being respected for. And I'm trying to keep doing that so that I keep bringing cutting edge technologies to India. I just started a very interesting cell therapy company as a startup all over again, where I created on my own personal basis, I started a company called Immunil. We are trying to bring these very cutting edge cell therapies for cancer patients to India. And I've got some of the leading people who are joining me in this. There's an oncologist called Siddhartha Mukherjee from New York. Yes. He and I basically got together and Sid said to me, Kiran, we've got to do this for India. And I'm willing to help you.
It's a wonderful book on cancer.
Yeah, the emperor of all maladies. So Sid and I have started on this journey. And now we are very excited. And he said to me, the first patient you infuse, I want to be there. So you see, it's about a sense of purpose. What are you trying to do? I want to put India into a very different kind of a global perception space. And so that's the journey I'm on.
Now in your journey, Sheena, what have been your greatest learning and challenges?
My challenges have been about, at different phases of my journey, of course, it's been different challenges. Initially I had, my gender challenges. Then that was overcome very easily when I started succeeding. Then it was about the business challenges of what I was trying to do, because people thought that I was taking big risks and they didn't want to basically invest in a research-led business. And I had to overcome that challenge, which I did. Now everyone is very excited with the kind of research we're doing. In fact, I started a research services company called Gene, which is now a very, very valuable company. And now, of course, it's this whole thing of, can you innovate? Can you really bring blockbuster drugs to global markets? Come on, stop kidding me. That's the kind of thing I now have to overcome, that challenge, that perception challenge. And I'm very confident we can do that, you know. And then of course I had another challenge, which was I want a lot of women leaders in my company. And for a long time I didn't find enough women leaders. But today, all of a sudden, in the last few years, I found a lot of very capable women who are now playing leadership roles in my company. So I think, you know, there are different kinds of challenges. And I think you have to keep addressing those challenges and keep overcoming them.
Okay, so we're about to close, but I'd just like very brief closing remarks from all three of you. I'll start with Sushmita.
Yes, sir. Closing remarks. I see. So, you know, what was interesting and what I would like to share here is that Biocon also enjoys a very powerful employer brand. You know, many scientists all across the world are very eager to work in the Biocon lab. And I did probe this fact while doing my research, that what is it that makes global talent feel so attracted to working in this company? And of course, I came up with a number of answers which all figure in the Biocon way that I have tried to, you know, articulate. So that's what I thought additionally I would like to share here.
Right. Gopal?
Just moving away for a moment from Biocon, I've written lots of books so far, but this series has been very exciting for me for 2 or 3 reasons which I would like to mention in my closing remarks. First, to the best of my knowledge, even at the risk of overstating, this is the first example of a seasoned practitioner collaborating with 5 academics. It's very tough, I can tell you, but it's been extremely rewarding. The second thing is that research and academic research in management and business practice have come together. Otherwise, academics write their own paper, which practitioners don't read, and practitioners do their own things, which academics don't read. I think we managed to bring them together. The third is, I've also been a CEO of a company. I got a chance to sit and listen to 6 CEOs. And at a time of my career when I have finished being an active CEO, it gave me tremendous lessons, which are all captured in the books. Just to complete it, I would like to say that Ramadura and Kohli in TCS, Anil Nayak in Larsen & Toubro, Deepak Parekh in HDFC, Uday Kotak in Kotak Mahindra, and Harsh Mariwala in Marico have all been written shaper books about them. But they are all exhibiting similar characteristics, but each one does it in his own way. You know, it's like Bharatanatyam. Bala Saraswati's art is very different from Hema Malini's art or Vaijayanti Mala's art. But it's still Bharatanatyam. And therefore, it's been professionally very satisfying for me. Today we've talked about Biocon, but I feel very good. I hope practitioners also find it very useful. That's my closing statement.
Great. Kiran?
So first and foremost, I think, I think entrepreneurs are going through a very evolutionary journey where they keep changing, reinventing, course correcting, and even sort of, completely changing direction, like in my case. I think what was fascinating for me about this book was that I actually learnt a lot about things which I had forgotten about, things which actually made me realize that I had some method in my madness, which is what I think Gopal and Sushmita made me realize, that it wasn't so chaotic, that there was some thinking and there was some critical thinking which made me do certain things, which I hadn't thought about and structured in that way. So thank you for showing me that part of my journey.
Wonderful. It's been wonderful talking to all of you. Kiran, thank you so much, and all the best for whatever you're doing now.
Thank
Gopal,
you.
thanks so much. More books from you. Sushmita, thank you for your contribution. And
all the best. Bye-bye. Take care, everybody.
And keep listening to Tata Literature Live Business Shastras. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Kiran. Bye, Sushmita.